Adam has an incredible background. Started in the Marines, and that is a Marines football helmet right behind him. There's a good story behind that, so I highly recommend you follow up with Adam. Not only served, thank you for your service, but also worked in. You are the national director of cybersecurity. Man, I'm sure there's plenty of questions you're not even allowed to answer, but incredible experience and I'm sure tons of learning. You were at Veritone where you led security. You went through a FedRAMP process, so you know all about compliance and what's involved there. The CISO at Binti foster family platform, really incredible work there. You were the VP of Enterprise Security at PayPal, and now you're consulting. Like, give us a little bit of your background, if you don't mind.
Yeah, and you hit most of it. I spent some time at Salesforce doing
Oh,
FedRAMP
I missed
compliance.
Salesforce. That's right,
It's
4 years at
okay.
Salesforce. How could I miss
I
that?
was doing pure compliance. It was miserable, but I love the people and I love what we were accomplishing, so I'm okay with it. But really, my background is basically as you mentioned, and I've been focused as much as I can on causes that I care about, and tried to pay attention to the human parts of the work that I do.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's one of the things that I've really learned to love about you in the years that we've gotten to know each other. But let's dive into this, right? So, one of the things that I met you probably 3 years ago,
I think
and
so.
you were already you already had APIs on your radar, right? As a cybersecurity professional, right? And honestly, like I feel like this market has been slow to recognize the threats and the risks. And honestly, I'm kind of like, how many breaches do we need before we truly take this seriously? So I'm kind of curious, like, what put this on your radar? Like, what made you take this seriously way back when we're still playing catch up in a lot of cases?
Yeah, it's an interesting story because I liken it or I take it back to like my original starting in the Marine Corps where I was working on F-18s. So I was working on actual physical components, and that's where I started my tech career was work fixing targeting systems. And then as I moved up through the stack and became a communications officer, I got to learn physical data centers, physical networking, phone network, satellite, and all that. And what that taught me was that I never quite trusted any particular layer because we were being threatened at all those different layers. During my
Right.
time at the Marine Corps Recruiting Command, we had an instance where a bunch of Lenovo computers woke up and wanted to call home. And we were like, oh, well, that's different. Maybe we don't want to use these Lenovo's anymore in our network. And
Oh,
what
yeah,
that taught me was,
I remember the
yeah,
issues there. Yeah.
they no longer are allowed to purchase them for the US government.
Yeah.
And so what happened was I never grew to trust any particular layer. And as we move through the 2010s and into the 2020s, um, a lot of what software engineering is these days is actually making clever API calls and doing well securing those. And I noticed that nobody was really paying attention to them and just kind of assumed that because it was a API call or because they were using an API that it was fine. Much
Yeah.
like if you pick up a telephone, it's just fine. And so that's why I started digging into it. And as I started digging, there was just nothing there. There was nobody talking about it, and that's when you and I met. When your original work with APIsec really got me interested in it, and I've been paying attention to it ever since.
Yeah, and I think you're at the forefront there as you have been throughout your career. It's remarkable. We do a lot of workshops for organizations, and our goal is frankly just to raise awareness about API risks. And the thing that works more than anything is we have this map of API breaches, and it is littered with names and huge amounts of impact. And then we go through real world breaches, and and it's not even like complex, like, complicated defenses. It's like I just read about yesterday, Adam, about there's an API platform for restaurants, I think in India, where they left every API open, every single, and there are thousands of restaurants using this. Guy could send food to another table, view every order for the last year, like incredible stuff. And all you have to do is add authentication. So there's some basic blocking tackling that we're
Yeah.
missing here on APIs.
Yeah, and I think that what's interesting about that is that when when you bring this up to the engineering side of the house, they're like, "Yeah, that's of course we want speed. We want, low latency. We want things to happen quickly. We don't want to stick encryption in there and make it slower." And part of that's just education that, if you do that correctly, it
Yeah.
actually works quite well.
Education definitely is key. It's near and dear to our heart here at APIsec University, of course. Let me ask you another question, right? So one of the challenges I've seen with API security is where does the responsibility live, right? And maybe I'll frame this a little bit. I mean, you can you know question the structure, but you got AppSec on one side, and you've got dev engineering on the other side, right? And where I see this gap is, like, for example, I'll talk to AppSec teams, and they'll say, like, we don't even know what APIs we got, right? And fair, right? I think that's very true, right? But I've never talked to a VP of engineering that says we don't know what APIs we got, right?
Yeah.
So, like, where does this responsibility live? How should we be tackling it?
It it's the most difficult hot potato, in my opinion, to handle these days because it's normally the security teams, and in my past in the financial services industry, it was the security team that had all the sensing for APIs that landed in the infrastructure. And I say landed very specifically because that's what's happening is the security teams are catching what lands into the space that they scan or into the space that they
Yeah,
monitor. The issue is that much like a conveyor belt that's dropping these APIs into the environment, somebody upstream is making decisions about it.
yeah,
And really, if you ever want to truly have an end-to-end API security and application security program that's effective, it can't be just the security team that's paying attention. The security team can be going back to the engineering teams and educating them, which is perfect for learning the OWASP top 10 for APIs and things like that with APIsec University. Like that's what needs to happen in addition to securing the platform from the other end of it. Because at the end of the day, quality code is secure code and
yeah,
quality APIs are secure APIs. And that needs to be monitored both by the head of engineering and the head of security. My personal vision is one day I want to trick a company into letting me run engineering because I just am going to apply a lot of really good security principles and let them run with the rest of the design stuff. And I
yeah.
think it'll be super effective.
Well, it's this siloing of security and dev. It just doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
Like, you can't fix API flaws with a firewall rule, right? Like, this is logic, right? That sits in and this is what attackers are looking for, right? They're trying to find a flaw in your logic that is almost impossible to detect in a real runtime request, right? You're not going to create a firewall
Right.
rule, right? Because how does the firewall know if I'm requesting my records or your records, right? That is a level of nuance that's difficult to enforce. But to your point, like, we need to wire in security into the applications themselves, right?
Yeah.
And we often bring in security at the very end. So I'm curious, like, you've sat in a lot of security roles and leadership, like, is this kind of the state of the art? Like, you develop start stuff and then you secure it at the end when it's time to go live?
I wish I had seen it, otherwise consistently.
Yeah,
I've actually during my time at Binti, because they had a very conscientious CTO and a really good dev team, they actually did bake security into it before I even got there as the CISO. So I didn't have a lot of cleanup to do because they were making such good decisions from the very beginning. Doesn't matter that they were running Ruby on Rails, which maybe isn't the best for like large scale applications, but for what we were doing, it was perfect and they
yeah,
really were paying attention from the beginning. To me, it's like I don't know how many of you are going to be old enough to remember, but driving a Ford or a Chevy in the '80s compared to a Toyota Corolla in the '80s was two very different things. You
yeah,
never know exactly what kind of experience you're going to have when you turn the car on, unless it's a Toyota, because they would from the very beginning of the assembly line bake in quality
yeah,
and control checks, and that's the opposite of what American car companies were doing at the time. And so really it comes down to, sure, if you're going to catch with a security tool 10,000 flaws in your API security, that's awesome. Go clean those up, please. But
yeah,
at the same time, go to the very beginning of the assembly line, teach the engineers, and even teach the product people. Product
mm,
people are very important in this because
yeah,
they need to know why security is important as they design the business flows, they design the different calls that are going to be made.
yeah.
That's where the real difference gets made. Otherwise, you're just going to be in a never ending firefighting mode.
I couldn't agree more. We need these two teams working a lot better together and interacting. So let's get a little more. Let's bring it down to another level, right? So API security, right? There's lots of different aspects to it, right? So I'll throw out a few, and maybe you've got others in mind, right? You've got sort of people, process, governance kind of things, right? You've got testing, you've got monitoring, right? You've got discovery, like of all these things, there's a lot of folks on probably on this call. They're trying to figure out API security, right? They're like at the very starting points, and they're trying to figure out where to start. Do you have advice, or where have how have you approached API security in your different roles?
Yeah, definitely, and I especially know the wrong way to go about it. The wrong way to go about it is to just pay attention to whatever scan results you get and just try to knock those down.
Yeah,
What I've seen and what I've done that's effective in the past is basically to have a divide and conquer mentality, where you have smaller teams or even individuals who are tasked with each of the OWASP top 10 API security rules or
yeah,
failures, and not only fix those, but find the way to make a process where it's difficult to introduce those again.
yeah,
Cross-site scripting has been around for what, 20 years that we've been dealing with this, and it still
mhm,
happens on a regular basis. And what needs to happen is, you need to get to you need to get to the point where your process doesn't allow those things to happen. And
yeah,
so if you assign a small team to each one of these, or a person to each one of these, or even if it's a group, if you're a small team, and have them focused in those areas, then you can start to break it apart. Because as you were saying, some of these are business process logic flaws. They're not actual API flaws. It's the business process that surrounds it. A lot of times what I've seen is it's not even like an API problem, it's an identity and authentication problem, and you don't deal with those the same way as you do other
yeah.
problems, and so breaking them apart like that is gonna help.
Well, I actually really like that you didn't pick one of the 4 or 5 things that I threw at you, but kinda looked at it more holistically.
Yeah.
And you're right, like, how do we build processes that prevent the flaws from entering? It reminds me of I started my career at General Motors, right? I was
Oh,
designing
really? Yeah.
cars and airbags and all these kinds of things, and we had this whole Six Sigma thing, which was really all about, like, how do you make it not possible to have flaws, right? And we've done sessions. My good friend Raj Umadas has talked about, like, we want to create processes that eliminate the opportunity for flaws to enter into the system. And what's interesting to me is when I talk to folks out there, they tend to fixate on one of these, 4 or 5 aspects of API security, and the one that stands out is discovery, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, and for good reason, right? Like, if you don't know about it, what are you going to do about it, right? But we've seen people. I've had people tell me point blank, like, we're going to do discovery this year, and next year we're going to do, mitigation, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, well, if you know the front door is unlocked, right, or the roof is on fire, you might want to do something about that.
Yeah, it's funny that there's a tendency among security professionals, as much as we don't like to spread fear, uncertainty, and doubt in other people, we like to scare ourselves a lot. And like instead of, if you've got a spider infestation in your house, don't just go buy a book of spiders so that you know what kind they are. Maybe
Yeah,
also like start trying to do something about it. But instead of just finding out about it, and if you are taking snapshots of how bad things are, and not paying enough attention to how you're going to mitigate or how you're going to prevent, your snapshots are going to look progressively worse and more scary, which again is fun. It's fun to scare yourself. I like Halloween too, but maybe also put a plan in place to not have those problems.
we love Halloween over here, and we actually last year we did a whole we envisioned how horror movie posters with API slants to them. Just wait, we're gonna do something fun for Halloween again this year. I saw this question come
Yeah.
in from Emmanuel. This is a big question, right? Like, where do you come in on this one?
Yeah, I've spent too long in leadership positions to answer this question directly, Manuel. So I'm going to say both are super important.
Yeah,
There are flaws in APIs that cannot be found by automated means right now. Maybe in the future that's possible, but I actually think that there will always be a component for manual
yeah,
testing. And
yeah,
if you're not doing automated testing, then you're either going to have some really bored, disgruntled analysts doing all the manual testing
Yeah.
who are going to miss a lot, or you're going to have just pure automated testing and catch everything every single
Yeah.
time, but there's still going to be that one edge case. So I would say that, especially if you're talking about becoming a professional, pen tester or offensive security type for APIs, hone both skills well.
Yeah.
Do both. If you don't know how to do it manually, it's not likely that you're going to be able to employ the automation effectively
Yeah.
when it comes time to automate the scans. So understanding both is super important.
Yeah, I think it's why our number one most popular course on APIsec U is our pen testing course.
Yeah.
Where Corey like really digs into how do you craft a request? What kinds of, are the different attack vectors and techniques and so forth. Couldn't agree more on doing both, right? And to your point, like attacking or testing an API, I mean, you just think about it, if there's 100 endpoints and 20 different attack vectors, you've just created 2,000 different permutations for yourself. You're not going to get there by hand, right? Or you're going to
Right.
want to kill yourself at the end of it. But on the other hand, like there's unique nuances to your API that you need to be able to simulate, right?
Yeah.
So I think it really is a combination of both, right? And actually, it's a good tee up for what we're going to talk about at the very end of today's session. And API testing is very near and dear to our hearts here at APIsec. I want to throw this one up from Alexis. Question number one. Oh, wow. All right. How can advancements in AI be leveraged to crack and enhance security in modern API infrastructures? What are the potential risks and counters? You knew we were going to talk about AI here.
Yeah.
It had to
It
happen,
has to
right?
happen. Has
Yeah.
to happen. Like they would kick us out of the
Thank you,
internet. The
Alexis.
whole
That was a
internet
really
would kick us
interesting
out. But
question.
yeah. No, it is a good question, Alexis. And really, what it's going to do is convince a bunch of people that it's easier than it actually is. It's also going to provide a lower barrier of entry to a lot of people to be able to get into this. But what I want to adjust the question just slightly, Alexis, and talk about what can you do to smartly use AI to improve the security and have better risk or have better countermeasures and protections. And really the way to do that is by I always love it when the dog walks in.
Oh,
That's
I
my
got it
favorite.
away.
Oh no, this
That's
just made it the
Buttercup.
best. No, we had a good interview going, and now it's a great one because the dog entered the room.
I'll just point the camera at Buttercup
Yeah,
she brought a
seriously.
toy for me.
But what you want to do is you want to enhance the humans and
Yeah,
enhance the processes using AI. There will come a day when artificial intelligence will be able to kind of jump over that
yeah,
barrier of being able to be the one that designs things.
yeah,
It's not soon, and in the meantime, use it to enhance the people you have and give them time back to being creative. Because this goes back to Emmanuel's question. What's better, manual or automated testing? The thing about manual testing is that it involves creativity in the tester, which is, I think, why that course is so popular. It's because
yeah,
it's teaching you creative ways to bang away at an API. That
yeah,
feels good because it's creative.
yeah.
If you have a ton of analysts like you were talking about, just manually going at this, they don't have time to be creative, and that really sucks it out of a person. And so you want to have the opportunity to enhance their time and give them time back to actually sit, stare at a wall, and think about stuff.
Yeah, that was fantastic answer. And in fact, AI is turning out to be not just changing the landscape from an attack perspective, but um, it is also changing how we defend. Right? It's sort of it's an arms race, right? This is why if you want a good career, go into cybersecurity. You'll never be out of work.
It's true.
We won't have it. Ever completely solved. That's for sure. I see a bunch of more questions in here. Let's see, what's this one? I haven't even looked at Tim Williams. Hey, Tim, how are you? What three things can a business analyst help in API testing? Area of
Ooh,
design, test
great
design,
question, Tim. I love that question because this oh man, Tim, I was gonna go here anyway, but you teed
Oh,
it
I
up
know
for me.
Tim.
So
I knew he was going to come with something good. Thank you for
oh
the
yeah, I'll send him $1. That's what we
yeah.
should do. Yeah. So here's the important thing that Tim's bringing up here is that if you have just the security people doing all of this, you're going to have a very specific, narrow band view of what needs to happen. If you let just the engineers do this, you're also going to have a very narrow band. But as I mentioned before, this involves everybody, including the business process people. So you should actually have everybody from very beginning of customer interaction, where you're getting requirements from customers, to product who's designing, to engineering who's implementing, to the security people who are testing. Everybody needs to take a look and everybody needs to be involved in the process so that they can get to the most complete picture possible. And this really brings up the importance of diversity in these scenarios. And diversity doesn't just mean, should you bring the Mexican with blue hair? Yes, of course you should bring the Mexican with blue hair, but everybody else too, like every
Yeah.
different job, every
Yeah.
different, thinking style, learning style, everybody in the company is going to subsist on these things. So you might as well get them involved and help them.
Yeah. We're gonna run out of time. I think we're gonna have to bring you back, Adam, if you're game for it.
I'm down for it.
Would
Let's do
love
it.
to have you on one of our webinars. We got more questions than we can get to, but we do have two tracks here. I'm gonna throw this one because it's very self-serving. Kuda Kwache. How can you introduce automated API security? Please stick around to the end of today, and we're going to talk about that exactly, and we can get you on that path. But it's the right direction, right? Shift left
Yeah.
testing. Folks, make sure you follow Adam. He's pretty easy to find on LinkedIn. Incredible person. I love reading all your posts, and um, if you want to work with him, reach out. He's doing some interesting things. So, Adam, thank you for being here, man. I really, really, truly appreciate it, and I look forward to the next time.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dan. It's been a great conversation. And as Dan said, please, hit me up on LinkedIn. There's plenty of content there. You'll hear me repeat everything that I just said over and over again because they're the basic principles of what I believe. But I hope y'all really enjoy the rest of the content today.